So 10% of Americans are currently paying a monthly fee just to keep things they don't even use locked inside a corrugated metal box on the edge of town.
It is honestly wild when you say it out loud.
Right. I mean, think about that for a second. We are quite literally paying rent for our clutter.
Yeah, month after month.
Exactly. But here is the bizarre paradox of human behavior. We will completely agonize over a $5 latte.
Oh, absolutely. We stand there sweating the small stuff.
Yes, we will stand in a coffee shop and debate whether to get the oat milk because, it's an extra 60 cents.
Right. It feels like a massive financial decision in the moment.
It does.
Yeah.
Yet we will passively just automatically hand over $150 to a storage facility. And for what? To house boxes of old college textbooks and, like, a bread maker we haven't touched since 2018.
Which is just classic human psychology.
But why? Why is it so much easier to surrender to that massive monthly drain than it is to just buy the latte?
Well, it really comes down to a fundamental misunderstanding of cognitive load, right? It's about how our brains process decision-making.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
So budgeting and personal finance are almost universally taught to us as an engineering problem. You look at a spreadsheet, you tally the income, you subtract the expenses.
And if the number at the bottom is red, you're failing.
Exactly. It's presented as clean binary math. But the moment you actually try to execute that spreadsheet in the real world, you realize that money is never just math.
It's messy.
It's deeply emotional, it is heavily psychological, and honestly, it's constantly besieged by an environment that is literally engineered to make you part with your cash.
So the storage unit feels different to our brains.
Yeah, the storage unit feels permanent and abstract, so you just stop thinking about it. But the coffee is right in front of you, so it triggers your financial anxiety.
Wow, so we hyper-focus on the visible transactions, and we completely ignore the invisible hemorrhaging. And that is exactly what we are tearing apart in this deep dive. Welcome, everyone. We are throwing out the conventional, guilt-ridden, mathematically rigid approach to personal finance today.
We really are. It is time for a total reset.
Because today, we're looking at a stack of sources that completely reimagine how you interact with your money. We've got modern behavioral frameworks from platforms like Her First $100K and Debt-Free Mom.
Which are both fantastic. They take this intensely empathetic, reality-based approach to spending.
Totally. And we are blending that with institutional data from Synchrony, SoFi, and First Commonwealth Bank, plus some hard-hitting consumer credit counseling advice.
And we can't forget the academic side. We are digging into a really rigorous study on Generation Z's e-commerce habits in Indonesia.
Oh, that study is fascinating. It exposes the absolute psychological warfare of online shopping. So what's our goal here today?
Well, the mission for you, the listener, is to walk away from this conversation with the architecture for a completely personalized, highly flexible financial system.
Not just another spreadsheet.
No, absolutely not a restrictive cage. We are building a defensive perimeter. We're going to build a system that actively lowers your daily baseline stress and shields you from the traps of algorithmic marketplaces.
And I think the best part is that it gives you permission to spend, right?
Exactly. Most importantly, it gives you radical permission to spend money on the things that bring you absolute joy without a single ounce of guilt.
Okay, let's unpack this because guilt-free spending is basically the holy grail. But before we get to the fun part of allocating money for joy, we have to deal with the foundation.
Right, the structural integrity of your financial house.
Exactly. We have to address that invisible hemorrhaging we just talked about. So according to the Consumer Credit Counseling Service guidelines we're looking at, the CCCS people generally categorize expenses into variable costs and fixed costs.
And the behavioral track there is that everyone obsesses over the variable costs.
Because they feel controllable on a daily basis, right? Like groceries or gas.
Yeah, but it's a profound tactical error. Trying to save money by monitoring your daily variable costs is exhausting.
Like skipping the casual dining and the coffee.
Right. It requires immense, continuous daily willpower. It is honestly the financial equivalent of trying to lose weight by staring at a piece of cake all day and forcing yourself not to eat it.
Oh man, that sounds miserable.
It is. Eventually your willpower depletes. You experience decision fatigue and you cave.
It's that classic stop buying avocado coast lecture. I mean,
Yeah.
It's insulting because it implies that financial security is just a matter of denying yourself small pleasures every single day of the year.
And it completely ignores the heavy hitters. The CCCS article outlines strategies to lower fixed costs instead.
Those are the expenses that do not change from month to month.
Exactly. Your rent, your car payment, your insurance, your subscriptions. When you lower a fixed cost, you are making a single high-leverage decision.
So you just do it once.
Right. It requires a one-time burst of effort, but it yields immediate, recurring, and completely effortless monthly savings for years to come.
It's like you lower the water level of your entire life. If you have a high water level of fixed costs, every single paycheck is just barely keeping you afloat.
That is a perfect visualization.
If your income dips even slightly or you have one unexpected medical bill, you are instantly drowning.
Right. So to lower that water level, the source targets some major structural areas. It points to that staggering storage unit statistic you opened with.
Get rid of the storage unit.
Yes. And it also suggests performing a ruthless subscription scrub down, going through your bank statements and severing ties with the streaming services and the app trials.
The gym memberships you haven't utilized in 90 days.
Exactly. It is all about eliminating that ambient financial leakage.
Okay, but I have to call out something in this CCCS advice that honestly feels completely detached from reality.
Oh, the housing advice.
Yes. They explicitly list buy or rent a smaller home as a primary tactic for lowering fixed costs. I mean, that feels like telling someone with a headache to amputate their head.
It is a pretty intense recommendation.
Right. Moving is wildly expensive, logistically nightmarish, and emotionally exhausting. How is that actionable for someone who is stressing out about their monthly bills today?
No, it's a completely fair critique. Telling someone to downsize their living situation is not a weekend project.
You need upfront capital for deposits, movers, closing costs.
Absolutely. The source includes it because, strictly mathematically speaking, housing consumes the largest percentage of a person's income.
So the biggest opportunity for savings.
Right. From an actuarial standpoint, reducing your housing costs offers the most dramatic single point of savings. But you are absolutely right that it is a long-term strategic maneuver.
It's not an immediate tactical fix.
Not at all. If that lever is too heavy to pull right now, you just pivot to the smaller fixed costs that you actually can control this week.
Like the automotive trap. The force leans heavily into avoiding car payments entirely by purchasing reliable vehicles with cash.
Which, again, requires having the cash in the first place.
True, but the underlying principle is sound. A $600 monthly car payment is a massive, self-inflicted wound to your cash flow.
Yeah, if you can eliminate that one fixed cost, your breathing room expands exponentially.
And the CCCS also highlights something much less glamorous but highly effective: utilities.
Oh, the energy consumption data is wild. They note that the average consumer spends approximately 7% of their annual income on energy.
7%. I mean, if you make $70,000 a year, you are handing nearly $5,000 to the utility company just to keep the lights on and the water warm.
That's a vacation. That's a massive investment contribution.
But much of that is just passive waste, right?
Completely. Installing a programmable thermostat so you aren't heating an empty house, or just lowering the baseline temperature of your water heater.
Or negotiating a better rate with your provider if you're in a deregulated market.
Exactly. These are all one-time actions. You do it on a Saturday afternoon, and you passively recoup hundreds of dollars over the year.
You don't have to summon the willpower to do it every day.
Right, the system just becomes more efficient.
It's really about reclaiming your baseline. So let's imagine you actually do this. You aggressively scrub your subscriptions, you renegotiate your insurance premiums, you clear out that absurd storage unit, and you optimize your utilities.
The water level drops.
Suddenly, the water level drops. You look at your checking account at the end of the month, and instead of scraping the bottom, you have a surplus. You finally have breathing room.
And this is a big but, human nature dictates a very specific reaction to surplus.
Lifestyle creep.
Yep. If we don't intentionally direct that newfound money, it will just invisibly absorb into slightly more expensive takeout and random Amazon purchases.
We have to shift from a posture of restriction to a posture of absolute intention.
And this is the inflection point where financial planning stops feeling like a punitive diet and starts functioning as life design.
I love that. Life design.
We are moving away from asking, what am I not allowed to buy, to asking, what do I actually value?
Which brings us to the framework from her first $100K in Synchrony. They talk about values-based spending and building a conscious spending plan.
Yes, this is heavily influenced by the philosophy of money expert Ramit Sethi.
And there is this brilliant anchoring quote from Paula Pant in the material that completely rewired my brain on this. She says, You can afford almost anything. You just can't afford everything.
That single sentence fundamentally dismantles the scarcity mindset.
It really does.
Yeah.
Because when people say, I'm on a budget, the implicit subtext is usually, I am depriving myself. I cannot have what I want.
Right, but Paula Pant flips that into an allocation mindset. You absolutely have resources, and those resources give you incredible power, but they are finite.
So the goal isn't to eliminate spending entirely.
Not at all. The goal is to ruthlessly concentrate your spending on the areas that actually deliver fulfillment.
So to structure this, her first $100 K breaks it down into a highly practical three-bucket approach. Let's walk through it.
Okay, so bucket one is your necessary expenses.
This is the non-negotiable infrastructure of your life, right?
Yeah.
Your housing, your groceries, your utilities.
Exactly. And ideally, this is the bucket we just optimized and shrank by lowering those fixed costs we were just talking about.
Got it. And bucket two.
Bucket two is your financial trajectory, your emergency fund, your debt payoff, your investments.
Boring but necessary.
Yeah.
But bucket three. Bucket three is where the entire emotional experience of money changes.
Bucket three is discretionary spending. But notice the terminology they use here. It's not miscellaneous.
It's not just leftovers.
Right. It is a deliberate allocation for joy. The challenge presented in the framework is to select three and strictly three highly specific value categories.
These are the categories that bring you extreme, unapologetic joy. And the examples from the first $100 community in the sources are so beautifully distinct.
They really are. They ask people what purchases absolutely light them up.
Yeah, like one person said their values were plants, art, and crocheting.
And someone named Katham said travel, eating out, and self-investment, like hiring coaches.
And somebody else just commented, I want 4 categories. Which is honestly hilarious and deeply relatable.
We all want 4 categories, but the philosophy is profound. If your core value is, say, nesting, and you want to spend a ridiculous amount of money on luxury bed sheets or an expensive at-home gel polish kit, you do it.
Without an ounce of guilt.
Because conscious spending is a dual mandate. You spend extravagantly or at least freely on the things you love, while actively and ruthlessly cutting costs on the things you don't care about.
So you stop spending money on things just because society implies you should.
Right, or out of sheer convenience, you redirect that capital toward your actual values.
The Synchrony text gives a perfect grounded example of this with a profile of a hypothetical 32-year-old graphic designer named Jordan.
Oh, this is a great case study.
So Jordan makes $80,000 a year, lives in a big city, and wants to balance paying off student loans with actually enjoying urban life.
Which is a very common scenario.
Extremely common. So Jordan builds a conscious spending plan based on percentages. 55% of the income is locked into bucket 1 fixed costs and necessities.
That's a solid baseline.
Then 20% goes into bucket 2 for savings, investments, and aggressive loan payoff.
Okay.
That leaves 25%, a full quarter of Jordan's income, dedicated entirely to guilt-free bucket 3 spending. And for Jordan, the value categories are restaurants, live music, and hobbies.
So what makes Jordan's example so illustrative here is the auditing process. Jordan looks at that 25% and realizes that a massive chunk of it is bleeding out into ride-sharing apps like Uber and Lyft.
Right, because Jordan doesn't inherently value sitting in the back of a stranger's car in traffic.
Exactly. It's just a passive convenience. It's a lazy default. So Jordan makes a behavioral shift and starts biking or taking the subway.
And suddenly, hundreds of dollars are freed up within that same 25% bucket.
And here's the kicker. Jordan doesn't take that freed up rideshare money and throw it at the student loans.
Wait, why not? Shouldn't you always pay down debt faster?
Not in this system. Jordan already hit the 20% savings goal in bucket 2. So Jordan takes that rideshare money and funds a weekend trip to a music festival.
Because live music is one of their core values.
Yes. They ruthlessly cut an expense they didn't care about to extravagantly fund a core value.
And because the system is designed this way, Jordan enjoys the festival without that nagging, sinking feeling in the pit of their stomach that they are derailing their financial future.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the psychological relief of that cannot be overstated. Guilt is an incredibly pervasive and destructive force in personal finance.
It really is.
When people feel guilty about their spending, they actually tend to spend more.
Really? Why?
It creates a self-soothing loop. You feel stressed about money, so you buy something to feel better in the moment, which generates more guilt, which generates more stress.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a vicious cycle.
But this framework breaks the loop. It forces a pause where you ask, Am I clicking buy because this aligns with my 3 core values, or am I just numb and seeking a dopamine hit?
It prevents the financial equivalent of the diet pendulum.
Exactly.
When you put yourself on a starvation diet like zero fun, absolute austerity, every penny goes to debt, you can only sustain it through sheer grit for so long.
Eventually, your willpower shatters.
Right. The pendulum swings violently to the other extreme, and you go on a massive, uncontrolled binge. Values-based spending keeps the pendulum hovering in a healthy, sustainable middle.
It is basically an allowance for humanity.
I think philosophically this sounds flawless. Spend on what you love, cut the rest. But let's introduce a little friction here. Let's look at the actual lived experience of managing money.
Okay, let's get into it.
Life does not neatly adhere to perfect, static percentages. 55, 20, 25 looks phenomenal in the spreadsheet. But what happens when your dog swallows a sock and needs a $2,000 surgery?
That changes the math pretty fast.
Right. Or, on a less dramatic scale, what if you just really want to buy a beautiful winter coat, but clothing isn't one of your 3 designated value categories? Does this entire elegant system just collapse the moment reality hits it?
That is the precise fracture point where traditional budgeting advice fails.
Because it's too rigid.
Yes. The financial industry loves to build these pristine mathematical models that completely shatter upon contact with real life. If a system requires a perfect environment to function, it is a fundamentally broken system.
Which brings us to the necessity of building shock absorbers. And the source material from Debt-Free Mom addresses this head-on.
She is brilliant on this topic.
She points out that the primary reason people abandon their budgets isn't a lack of discipline, it's a lack of rhythm. Your budget doesn't match the unpredictable cadence of your actual life.
Right. A classic example she gives is that your rent is due on the 1st of the month, but your biweekly paycheck doesn't actually clear the bank until the 4th.
Which happens all the time.
All the time. And if you are strictly looking at a 30-day aggregate spreadsheet, the math says you have enough money to pay the rent.
But the reality on the ground on the 1st of the month is that your account is empty.
Exactly. A rigid system interprets that temporal mismatch as a catastrophic failure. You feel like you're drowning, even though the math over the macro timeline works out. Rigid budgets manufacture artificial emergencies.
So to combat this, Debt-Free Mom details 5 specific elements to inject radical flexibility into a budget so it bends instead of breaking. Let's dig into the mechanics of these.
Let's do it.
The first one is something she calls the budget buffer. I found this fascinating because my instinct is always to give every single dollar a highly specific job.
But she is advocating for intentional slack.
Yes, she advocates leaving $50 to $75 a week completely unallocated. It doesn't belong to the grocery fund, it doesn't belong to savings, it has no job title.
It exists purely to absorb the friction of daily existence.
The friction of a Tuesday, basically.
Exactly. It's for the afternoon iced coffee you didn't plan for because you had a terrible meeting, or it's for the extra pack of diapers because you miscounted what was in the nursery.
Or giving your kid $10 for a school fundraiser you totally forgot about.
Right. If your budget is planned down to the penny, an unexpected $15 expense derails your entire week. You have to go in and steal from other categories, recalculate.
And suddenly budgeting feels like a part-time job.
But the buffer absorbs that shock invisibly.
It's a friction buffer.
Oh.
Okay, the second element she introduces is personal spending cash. And this is crucial for anyone managing money with a partner.
It really addresses the reality of differing financial temperaments within a household. She uses her own marriage as the case study here.
Yeah, she is naturally inclined to spend, and her husband, Kyle, is naturally inclined to save.
So they allocate a specific amount, say $50 a month to each adult as no questions asked money.
So she might blow her $50 on a Tuesday morning on a random Amazon decor item.
And he might let his accumulate for 6 months to buy premium concert tickets. The monetary amount is secondary to the psychological mechanism here.
It grants autonomy.
Yes. It removes the necessity of a committee vote for every minor transaction, which prevents profound resentment from building up in the relationship.
I can see how that would save a lot of arguments. The third element is knowing your plans B and C, because relying solely on plan A is basically an exercise in delusion.
Exactly. Experiencing an unexpected expense is not an anomaly. It is the statistical norm. Cars break down. Roofs leak.
Life happens.
The critical maneuver is to pre-write your tactical response to an unexpected expense before you are in a state of panic.
So if your transmission blows, what is the protocol?
Right. Do you immediately halt all bucket 3 discretionary spending for the month? Do you pull from a specific tier of your emergency fund? Do you have the capacity to pick up an overtime shift?
If you have decided on the contingency plan in a calm, rational state, then an unexpected expense becomes an administrative hiccup rather than a full-blown existential crisis.
It's the difference between reacting to a fire and executing a fire drill.
Okay, the fourth element requires a significant cognitive shift. It's about expanding your time horizon. The advice is to stop budgeting month to month and start looking at least 6 pay periods ahead.
A 30-day window is simply too narrow a focal length.
Why is that?
Well, if you wake up on the 25th of the month and realize your semi-annual car insurance premium is due on the 3rd of the next month, and it's going to vaporize your checking account, you are entirely out of tactical options.
You are reacting to an emergency of your own making.
But if you saw that premium coming 6 pay periods ago, the response is entirely different.
It's manageable. You can carve out a fraction of that premium from each of those 6 paychecks, spreading the burden out over 3 months.
The central mantra of this approach is, do not let things that are not a surprise feel like a surprise.
Birthdays happen on the same day every year.
Exactly. Christmas is not an ambush. Car registrations are on a predictable schedule. We have to stop treating predictable cyclical expenses as sudden emergencies.
Which flows perfectly into the final flexibility element. Overplan your bills, underplan your income.
It's the deliberate construction of a mathematical safety net. The reality is that most of our incomes and expenses have a degree of variance.
Utility bills fluctuate with the seasons, for sure.
And if you are a freelancer or work hourly, your income fluctuates too. The strategy is to consistently estimate your expenses on the high end of their historical average and estimate your variable income on the low end.
By doing this, anytime your projection is quote-unquote wrong, the error works massively in your favor.
You accidentally create a surplus instead of scrambling to cover a deficit.
You are systematically engineering pleasant surprises for yourself. Love that. Now let's look at this specific mechanism for those bigger known cyclical expenses we just talked about. The holidays, the car repairs, that winter coat we mentioned.
Ah, yeah.
The source material from Financial introduces a brilliant structural concept for this called sinking funds. They refer to them as guilt-free spending pots.
Sinking funds are arguably the most masterful psychological tool in personal finance.
How do they work?
The mechanics are simple. You set up separate, distinct mini savings accounts or pots for specific purposes. You might have one for car maintenance, one for vacations, and one for clothing.
Oh?
Every time you get paid, you trickle a small predetermined amount into each pot. Over time, the balance grows. Let's say you've been putting money into the clothing pot for a few months.
All right.
You walk into a store, you see a jumper that costs 50 pounds, and you check your clothing pot. It has 50 pounds in it. The rule of the sinking fund is absolute. You buy the jumper. No hesitation, no debate, no guilt.
Okay, but I need to challenge the premise here for a second.
Go for it.
Isn't a sinking fund essentially just a rebranding exercise? It's just a savings account. We're just moving numbers from one column to another column on a screen.
Yeah.
How does this actually alter human behavior when you're standing at the cash register holding that sweater?
Because it completely short-circuits the emotional experience of the transaction.
In what way?
Well, if you only operate with one massive generalized savings account, your brain views that large number as your ultimate security blanket. It's your safety net.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, every single time you withdraw money from that general account to buy something discretionary, like a jumper or a sweater, your brain registers it as a loss.
Oh, I see.
It feels like you are actively stealing from your future security. You feel like you are cannibalizing your emergency fund or delaying your house deposit. It triggers loss aversion and guilt.
Wow. Yes, every purchase feels like a betrayal of your ultimate goals.
Exactly. But with a sinking fund, the psychological accounting is completely different. The money sitting in that specific clothing pot is psychologically categorized as already spent.
The moment you transferred it into that pot 3 weeks ago, you mentally let go of it.
Right. So you aren't stealing from your savings. You are simply executing a pre-approved plan.
You are acting on a mandate you gave yourself in the past.
It removes the friction, the fear, and the guilt entirely. It is a structured, systematic way to give yourself permission to actually enjoy the resources you've worked so hard to acquire.
I really love that concept of pre-approved permission. It's deeply empowering. But here is where we have to face a very grim reality.
Uh-oh.
Even if we do all of this, even if we build the sinking funds, construct the budget buffers, and clearly define our 3 core values, why do we still find ourselves lying in bed at 11:30 at night mindlessly clicking buy now on items we absolutely do not need.
A great question.
Why does the system still fail us so frequently? To understand that, we have to recognize the environment we are operating in. We are not just battling our own lack of discipline, we are fighting on the psychological battlefield of the modern digital economy.
And this is where the conversation shifts from behavioral personal finance to environmental consumer psychology. The friction of the modern world has been intentionally eradicated.
Which brings us to this deeply insightful academic study published in the Journal of Innovative and Creativity.
This study is phenomenal.
It examines Generation Z consumers in Indonesia, specifically analyzing how they navigate massive, hyper-optimized e-commerce platforms like Shopee, Tokopedia, and Lazada.
Right.
The researchers set out to measure the clash between two internal human forces, financial planning and self-control, when they are actively pitted against the persuasive, weaponized design of these digital marketplaces.
And the findings of this study are critical for anyone who engages in online commerce, regardless of their generation or geography. We have to understand that e-commerce platforms are not neutral spaces.
They aren't just catalogs.
No, they are not passive catalogs where you casually browse goods. They are highly active, aggressively engineered, behavioral environments.
They utilize advanced algorithmic product recommendations that know what you want before you do.
Exactly. They deploy flash sales, accompanied by literal countdown timers ticking away in red digits on your screen. They flood your visual cortex with stimuli.
And the payment part is just frictionless.
Right. They utilize entirely frictionless payment gateways, digital wallets, biometric confirmation, and buy now, pay later integration.
Oh, the buy now, pay later feature, the Klarnas and the Afterpays, are absolutely wild. It turns the transaction into a video game. It makes the money feel completely abstract and fake.
Behavioral economists refer to this concept as the pain of paying.
The pain of paying.
Yeah. In the physical world, handing over currency triggers a mild pain response in the brain. It's a natural braking system. These digital platforms are deliberately designed to anesthetize that pain.
So don't feel the loss.
They bypass our reflective, rational, slow-thinking cognitive systems, and they create a direct neurological shortcut to our impulsive, effective, fast-thinking responses.
They manufacture a profound sense of artificial urgency.
They induce intense FOMO, the fear of missing out. They reduce the window of time you have to logically reflect on a purchase down to a fraction of a second. It's like walking into a casino where there are no clocks, no windows, and they've given you plastic chips so you forget you're gambling with your mortgage.
And Generation Z, which this study specifically targets, is right in the crosshairs of this machinery because they are digital natives.
They grew up entirely within this algorithmic ecosystem.
They're constantly saturated by digital social influence, peer-to-peer reviews, and parasocial relationships with influencers who are quietly selling them lifestyles.
So the researchers posed the ultimate question. What is the defense mechanism against this? How does a human brain fight a billion-dollar algorithm?
And they identified a dual defense system.
Yes. They found that both financial planning and self-control have a statistically significant negative effect on consumptive behavior.
In plain English, they both successfully reduce bad impulsive spending.
Yes, but they function in completely different ways. They operate as two distinct shields that must be layered together.
Okay, let's break that down.
So, financial planning acts as your structural boundary. It is the logical decision filter. Before you initiate the checkout process, the financial plan forces a rational inquiry. Does this item fit within my allocated budget? Does this purchase align with the broader goals I've established?
It requires you to pause and consult the map.
Exactly. Self-control, conversely, acts as the psychological mechanism. It is the real-time regulation of your impulses.
It was more visceral.
Right. Self-control is the visceral ability to feel the FOMO, to watch the red countdown timer approaching zero, to desperately want the dopamine hit of the purchase, and to still possess the fortitude to close the application.
Let me try to visualize this. If we think of your financial defense as a highly secure facility, like a modern data center or a vault, financial planning is the physical infrastructure.
I like this.
It's the concrete walls, the biometric locks, the security protocols you establish in advance. But self-control.
Yeah.
Self-control represents the security guards actively patrolling the perimeter in real time.
That is a perfect analogy.
Now, here is the most fascinating detail from the study's data. Statistically, the researchers found that self-control actually had a stronger mitigating effect on impulsive spending than financial planning did.
Which is counterintuitive for a lot of people.
Yeah, why would that be the case? I mean, if you have a flawless budget, an impenetrable concrete wall, shouldn't that structural math be enough to save you, regardless of how tired the guards are?
It is a brilliant question, and the researchers explore this dynamic extensively. The key variable is the friction of the environment.
Okay, explain friction here.
In a physical offline environment, your concrete wall, your budget, is often sufficient. If you create a budget and then drive to a physical shopping mall, there is an immense cost of effort required to execute a bad decision.
You have to physically go there.
You have to locate the item on the rack, physically carry it through the store, stand in a queue, interact with the cashier, extract your wallet, and hand over physical currency or wait for a card to process.
There is massive built-in environmental friction that gives your rational, slow-thinking brain ample time to catch up, consult the plan, and hit the brakes.
Exactly. You have 10 minutes standing in line to realize you don't actually want the sweater. You get bored and put it back.
The environment aids your restraint.
Precisely. But in a digital, hyper-optimized environment, the cost of effort has been reduced to effectively zero. You are one biometric tap away from a completed transaction.
Face ID and boom, it's bought.
You can possess the most perfect, elaborate, mathematically sound spreadsheet in the world, the thickest concrete wall, but if your self-control fails for 3 seconds at midnight while scrolling in bed, the wall is breached instantly.
The platform's user interface is designed to teleport you past the wall entirely.
That is why the researchers conclude that an effective intervention requires both layers. You absolutely need the concrete structure of the budget, but you urgently need to implement psychological cooling-off periods, artificial friction, to bolster the guards.
Because the environment offers zero friction on its own, and willpower is a finite resource. If we rely solely on our self-control to fight algorithms designed by behavioral psychologists, we will eventually lose. We will get tired, and we will click by.
So the ultimate goal is to build a system that either inherently introduces friction back into the process or automates the good decisions so the guards don't have to work so hard.
That brings us to the final phase of this deep dive, choosing your weapon.
This is the tactical application. We are moving from the philosophy of money to the actual architecture of your daily system.
According to the source material from NerdWallet and SoFi, the greatest myth in personal finance is that there is one universal, perfect budgeting method.
There just isn't.
The menu of available systems is vast, and the optimal choice depends entirely on how your specific brain processes information, what your current financial trauma or goals look like, and quite frankly, how much administrative effort you are willing to tolerate.
It's totally personalized.
Let's break down the primary contenders, starting with the most ubiquitous, the 50-30-20 budget.
The 50-30-20 framework is the ultimate baseline balance approach. It dictates that 50% of your net income goes toward absolute, non-negotiable needs housing, basic groceries, essential utilities.
Okay, that's the 50.
30% is allocated to wants, which perfectly integrates with the 3 value categories we discussed earlier in bucket 3.
Right, the fun stuff.
And the final 20% is dedicated strictly to savings, investments, and accelerated debt repayment.
It's a broad, macroscopic view.
It is. It is relatively easy to track without daily anxiety, and it ensures you are building a future while simultaneously permitting yourself to live in the present.
It's the general practitioner of budgets. Solid, reliable, but maybe not specialized enough if you have a specific ailment. Which leads us to the heavy-duty option, the zero-based budget.
Oh, the zero-based budget is an intense exercise in intentionality.
How intense?
The fundamental rule is that every single dollar of income must be assigned a highly specific job before the month even begins. You take your projected income and you allocate it to various categories: rent, groceries, sinking funds, debt, until you reach exactly $0 remaining.
So no slack at all.
None. It requires significant continuous effort. It typically necessitates specialized software or apps like YNAB. You need a budget or every dollar.
But the psychological mechanism is profound.
Very. By artificially creating a state where there is zero money left unassigned, it forces extreme clarity. For people who are chronic overspenders or who constantly wonder where their money evaporated to, the zero-based budget eliminates the shadows.
It forces you to confront the reality of your finite resources every time you make a transaction. If you overspend on dining out, the app forces you to manually pull that money from your vacation fund. You see the immediate consequence of the trade-off.
It's powerful, but it's a lot of work.
Now let's look at a total pivot in methodology. a system that abandons the digital realm entirely. The envelope system.
The envelope system is entirely analog and cash-based. The mechanics are visceral.
You literally use envelopes.
Yes, you determine your budget for variable categories like groceries, dining out, or fun money, and you go to the bank, withdraw that exact amount in physical currency, and distribute it into corresponding paper envelopes.
And when the envelope is empty?
When the dining out envelope is empty, you are unequivocally done spending money on restaurants for the month. You cannot swipe a card, you cannot borrow from the ether.
The source from First Commonwealth Bank features a quote from a financial planner named Daniel Chong that explains why this works so effectively.
Oh, I love this quote.
He says, "Our brains are wired so that something tactile in front of you that you can smell and feel is more real than something on your phone or a number in your bank account."
It is the deliberate reintroduction of friction.
Just like we talked about with the digital platforms.
Exactly. We just spent significant time discussing how e-commerce platforms invest billions to remove the pain of paying. The envelope system is a tactical countermeasure that intentionally maximizes that pain.
Handing over a physical $20 bill, feeling the texture of the paper, seeing the physical volume of your resources diminish, triggers a neurological loss aversion that tapping a piece of digital glass simply cannot replicate.
It recruits your sensory biology to aid your self-control.
It's brilliant for variable expenses. But considering the profile of our core listener, someone who is deeply curious, wants to optimize their life, but actively avoids the overwhelm of daily administrative drudgery, there is one system highlighted in the SoFi article that feels like the ultimate hack.
Yeah.
It's called reverse budgeting, or pay yourself first. Can we dive deeply into the mechanics of this?
Right.
Because it seems to solve the willpower problem completely.
Reverse budgeting is, without question, the most powerful methodology for an individual who desires maximum financial impact with minimal daily maintenance.
It's the ultimate automation of discipline.
It really is. Here's the operational flow. Instead of the traditional method where you pay your bills, spend money throughout the month, and then meekly hope there is a surplus left to save at the end, you completely invert the timeline.
You flip it upside down.
You identify your savings, investment, and debt reduction goals first. Let's assume you determine you need to save and invest $800 a month to hit your long-term targets.
Okay, $800.
On the exact day your paycheck hits your account, an automated system transfers that $800 out of your primary checking account and into completely separate investment and savings vehicles.
It disappears before the cognitive guards even wake up. You are effectively levying a tax on yourself.
Precisely. And here is the psychological liberation of reverse budgeting. Whatever money remains in your checking account after that automated transfer has occurred, that is yours to spend, utterly and completely guilt-free.
Wow. You do not need to categorize it into 50 different rows on a spreadsheet.
No, you do not need to agonize over whether you spent $40 on artisanal pizza or $40 on hardback books, because the most critical function funding your future has already been guaranteed.
That sounds incredibly freeing. It completely removes the daily decision fatigue. You don't need willpower because the good decision was executed by a server at 2 in the morning.
But the SoFi text is careful to point out that this isn't a magical cure-all. It has significant blind spots if your financial foundation isn't stable, right?
Yes, there are risks.
What's fascinating here is that it carries inherent risks that must be acknowledged. The primary warning from the source is that reverse budgeting is mathematically dangerous if you are carrying high-interest consumer debt.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. If you are paying 24% interest on a revolving credit card balance, you should not be blindly automating transfers into a high-yield savings account earning 4%. The math is actively working against you.
The high-interest debt represents a critical breach in the hull that must be prioritized before you build the automation engine.
Furthermore, it is highly risky for individuals with irregular, freelance, or commission-based incomes.
Because the checks vary so much.
Exactly. If the amplitude of your paychecks fluctuates wildly from month to month, an automated, rigid transfer of $800 might cause you to overdraw your account or bounce checks during a lean period.
So you must have a clear understanding of your personal financial topography before you deploy the weapon.
Definitely.
But I think what this entire progression points to, from trimming the fat to conscious spending to these various systems, is a profound sense of relief. We are trying to build a machine that generates peace of mind.
I think the most resonant sentiment in all the material we review comes from Catherine Hawley, a certified financial planner quoted in the first Commonwealth article.
What did she say?
She summarizes this entire philosophy beautifully. She essentially states that tracking every single penny, saving every receipt, and agonizing over every microtransaction is absolute overkill for the vast majority of people.
It's just too much friction.
If you are consistently living within your means and you are reliably hitting your automated savings and investment goals, you simply do not need to know that your electric bill was exactly $83.82.
The system must serve you. You must not serve the system.
Exactly.
The system must serve you. That is the definitive takeaway. We have traversed a massive amount of conceptual ground today.
We really have.
We started by confronting the invisible drains, the storage units, the forgotten subscriptions, the high water level of fixed costs that silently suffocate our cash flow.
And then we shifted the entire paradigm of budgeting away from punitive restriction.
Right, toward the radical concept of values-based spending, giving ourselves the mandate to spend extravagantly on our three core sources of joy while mercilessly cutting the rest.
We examined the necessity of elasticity building budget buffers, personal spending cash, and looking 6 pay periods into the future to absorb the inevitable chaotic shocks of daily life.
We explored the brilliance of sinking funds to fundamentally remove the guilt of a purchase.
We pulled back the curtain on the hyper-optimized, frictionless casinos of digital e-commerce, understanding exactly how algorithms weaponize our impulsivity.
And why we must build structural walls to defend our finite willpower.
And finally, we laid out the arsenal of tactical systems, from the intense sensory friction of the cash envelope system to the elegant automated liberation of reverse budgeting, allowing you to choose the exact architecture that fits your psychological profile.
It is entirely about reclaiming your agency, taking your financial power back from the shame-inducing spreadsheets and the predatory algorithms.
As we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative diagnostic tool to ponder.
Let's hear it.
We have spent this hour discussing values and intentionality. I want you to imagine a scenario. Assume a completely objective, total stranger were to be handed your bank and credit card statements from the last 90 days.
Okay, no names attached.
Right. They do not know your name. They do not know your hopes, your dreams, or the person you believe yourself to be in your head.
Just the data.
Based strictly and entirely on the empirical data of where your capital flowed over the last 3 months, what would that stranger conclude your core values in life are? Does that undeniable paper trail align with the person you actually want to be?
Oof. That is a heavy, clarifying, and absolutely necessary question. It strips away all the narrative we tell ourselves and leads only the behavior.
It really does.
It brings us right back to the beginning of our conversation. Your financial life isn't a clean binary X-ray. It is a messy, deeply emotional, heavily behavioral landscape.
But it is your landscape to shape. You are not a passive victim of it.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to execute one single tangible action today.
Just one small thing.
Log in and cancel one unused subscription. Sit down and clearly define your top 3 joy categories. Reroute $50 into a newly established buffer. Take one definitive step to build your wall. Until next time, keep diving deep.